Thanks everyone for coming out for our third in our opening week of events. I'm Heidi Kim, the director of the Asian American Center, and I'm very happy to be hosting this event today because this type of campus history is really what created the center. The legacy of different generations of alumni who were passionate about improving the student experience at Carolina and about educating others about Asian American identity. So today's event is aptly entitled Building History, Building Community, because the two of those go hand in hand. So as we're capturing this history, I think I have been inspired very much by the example of our Black alumni who have done so much to bring their history to the forefront. And so it's very appropriate that we're here in the Stone Center today, and we thank them for their generosity in letting us use this space. Asian Americans are a large and growing body of students on campus. They currently comprise 12% of the undergraduate student body and 17% of the overall student body, but it wasn't always this way. And in the 1990s, when a kind of critical mass of students, many of whose parents had come in the post-65 wave of immigration, or during the waves of refugee acts that brought in refugees from Southeast Asia, came of age, the 90s were a real flourishing time of Asian American student life on this campus. And so that is what we're focusing on today, the early days of some of our biggest and longest lasting student organizations and a faculty member who was there to see it all. So this history, of course, extends backwards and forwards from that, and we hope that we'll have future events focusing on all of these different eras. The first Asian American student, which is a question I get asked a lot these days, as far as we know, would have been one of the children of Chang and Eng, the famous so-called Siamese twins. Now, of course, Albert was his name. Albert wouldn't have identified as Asian American, wouldn't have understood what that term meant. And nonetheless, by our modern reckoning, he would be the first one. And followed, a few decades later, he was followed by Japanese students, as in foreign students from Japan. That's the next Asian presence that we have recorded on campus. And after that, we have a little bit of a gap to fill. So, there will be some digging into the yakety-yaks. But the next record I have is of two Japanese American students who Frank Porter Graham and local minister Charles M. Jones fought very hard to bring to campus during the World War II Japanese American incarceration. So Asian American presence on this campus has not always been something we could take for granted or something that other people welcomed. And that's also a part of this history that we want to truthfully capture. In the 1970s, we saw nationwide an important wave of student activism from Asian Americans, the birth of the term, the birth of a Pan-Asian consciousness, and then again in the 1990s, as I said, the wave that we're focusing on today. And fortunately, we have with us somebody who has written an award-winning seminar paper on this, and we'll share a little bit of that background before we get to today's panelists. So I think in this room, he may not need any introduction, but I'll give it anyway for archival purposes. Sean Nguyen, who just graduated this past June 2021, was one of the student leaders of the Asian American Center campaign and was hugely instrumental in the creation of the Asian American Center. His efforts were recognized with a Chancellor's Award, the Kirby Award for collaborative work among students, staff, faculty, and administrators. He majored in history, and he is currently a director's financial analyst at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in Washington, D.C. We are so appreciative of everything he's done, and it gives us great pleasure that we could drag him back to campus so quickly after he graduated. So thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Dr. Kim. Good afternoon, everybody. As Dr. Kim so kindly stated, my name is Sean Nguyen, and I'm delighted to be here today. So I've been asked to share about my research paper on the history of Asian American activism at UNC, which really started in the 1990s. But in preparing my paper, I struggled with the question of how do I distill 30 pages of research into an engaging and informative 10-minute oral presentation? One of my good buddies said, Sean, why don't you just read your paper off line by line, all 30 pages? And I told him that's a terrible idea, and I decided not to do that. Instead, what I'm going to try to do is talk about 3 key themes that I want everyone in here to walk away with by the time you all exit this auditorium today. And so to begin, the first theme, I want to provide some more context into what it was like to be Asian American in the 1990s at UNC. Secondly, I want to describe how the Asian American identity at Carolina was distinct from the one developing on the West Coast and in other urban areas. Lastly, I want to share the story about the Asian American Resource Center, which was a student effort that began in 1994 to establish more permanent resources for Asian American students at Carolina. So to start with the first topic, let me set the scene for you. It's September 1988, and you're a sophomore at Carolina, named Eugene Lao. You're a friendly, handsome, at times abrasive Taiwanese American kid intent on pursuing the pre-medical track. You've spent your entire childhood growing up in Greenville, North Carolina, where in 1980, when you're 11 years old, a US Census tract says that there are only 250 registered Asian residents in a nearly 100,000 residents in Pitt County. That means that you and your family are a part of the 0.26% of Asians in Pitt County. So, when you arrive to Carolina as a first year, this is the very first time in your life that you find a significant number of Asian Americans who dress like you, talk like you, and act like you. But even though you have the most amount of Asian American friends that you've ever had in your life, that in itself doesn't explain the full experience of what it's like to be Asian at Carolina. Although there are existing Asian organizations in 1988, such as Sangam, the South Asian Awareness Student Organization, CASA, the Korean American Student Association, and VSA, the Vietnamese Student Association. If you're Taiwanese American, like Eugene, where do you belong? In fact, in 1991, you give an interview with the Daily Tar Heel, the DTH, saying that, quote, UNC does not actively see Asians as a minority on campus. The university does not really cater to Asian needs, end quote. You describe in a later interview that whenever you and some Asian friends gather on the quad, this behavior, quote, usually brings a lot of stares, end quote. This sentiment of alienation is not unique to Eugene. Dozens of primary sources from the university archives reveal similar themes. In fact, in 1993, 2 years after Eugene has graduated, junior biochemistry major Jeff Huang, who is now a successful physician in Raleigh, tells the DTH that, quote, a lot of Asians on campus feel their role is one of invisibility. If you're not black or white, you can easily get lost in the mix, end quote. So, in 1988, to address this invisibility, Eugene and his other co-founders created the Asian Students Association, or ASA, which was a space for Asian students of all backgrounds to come together, socialize, and feel accepted at Carolina. But I must note, in its founding, ASA was not a political or radical organization. 7 years after ASA's founding, then ASA president Albert Huang told the DTH that, quote, in the beginning, the organization's only goal was to get people together. They wanted to meet people. They wanted to let people come and meet Asian students and realize, quote, wow, Asian students know how to have fun too, end quote. And so in hosting dances and parties and other social events, Eugene and his co-founders, admittedly, were not interested in heavy conversations of race and student activism. Rather, they were college students looking for community. They just wanted to have fun. It was only after Eugene and his co-founders graduated in 1991 that the next generation of Asian student leaders started claiming the term Asian American and establishing a more political identity. One of these student leaders was Billy Fan, a biology major from Clayton, North Carolina. And for the 1993 to 1994 school year, Billy served as ASA president. And under his leadership, ASA members began claiming themselves as Asian American rather than just Asian. For a Heritage Week celebration in 1994, Billy and his leadership team brought a prominent Filipino-American speaker to campus, who shared at the event that, quote, "When you identify yourself as Asian American, you are using a new vocabulary. You're identifying with Korean Americans, Pakistani Americans, Chinese Americans. I'm saying that we all have experiences in common, and as a large group, we can get a lot done," end quote. Under Billy's leadership, Asian American consciousness at Carolina flourished. And this consciousness flourished because Billy led initiatives such as establishing the East Win, the Asian American Student Voice, in December of 1993. The East Wind was an ASA-run student publication dedicated to educating the Carolina community on Asian American issues. On the opening page of its first publication, Billy articulated his hope for the paper, writing that, quote, "The East Wind will be a positive step in exploring the Asian American identity from the Asian American point of view," end quote. ASA Vice President at the time, David Liu, commented to the DTH reporter that the East Wind is necessary because, quote, "he would like for non-Asian students to understand that Asian Americans are, in truth, no different from other Americans. Our needs, our wants, our desires are the same as anyone else's. We should be treated as people. And that's what this newspaper teaches," end quote. And so from analyzing articles in the East Wind, the DTH in the 1990s, my research has found that the Asian American identity at Carolina can be defined sort of broadly in three interrelated themes. The first theme is that Asian American students often felt a feeling of invisibility or otherness, largely from the black and white racial binary that's prominent in the American South. Secondly, to overcome this invisibility, Asian American students desired to be seen as more American. And thirdly, from this desire, Asian American activism at UNC largely sought to educate the Carolina community about Asian American culture, rather than protest or be more politically charged. And as you can see, this Asian American identity that developed at Carolina was much less politically imbued than that of the one that developed in the West Coast in the 1960s or in other major cities during the 1960s civil rights movement. And so, with the East Wind successfully established after the 1994 school year, ASA and its student leaders began looking for their next project, which brings me to my very last topic. In October of 1994, the East Wind announced the idea for an Asian American Resource Center, the AARC, organized by a coalition of students from ASA, the Korean American Student Association, the Vietnamese Students Association, and Sangam. The AARC was, quote, "an important first step in providing basic support and informational services that are specific to Asian Americans and open to all students interested in Asian American culture," end quote. Jeff Huang, who is now a senior at UNC and the AARC's first student director, outlined the center's four main programs as the following. First, career counseling services. Second, mental health counseling services. Third, an alumni network and programming. And fourth, an Asian American Affairs and Resources database. As senior David Liu, now senior David Liu, expressed to the DTH, quote, "We, the organizers of the AARC, are trying to make the university understand and live up to its purpose of diversity. I think it's important for the university to realize that the faces of Carolina and America are changing. We, the Carolina community, must understand our various cultures," end quote. So throughout the 1994-1995 school year, Jeff, David, and other students organizing with the AARC movement envisioned the center to have an office, a reading room, and computer capabilities. These students dreamed that one day the AARC would follow the path of the UNC Black Cultural Center and become an institutionalized, university-supported center in years to come. Within 10 years, the AARC organizers had ambitious goals of having a permanent building, diversifying the university curriculum, and attracting Asian American scholars to Carolina. Though these long-term goals would ultimately require significant university funding and external support, in 1994, the DTH quoted Provost Richard McCormick, saying that he, quote, "supported the AARC and would do anything to meet the need of students," end quote. So, with the perceived support of key university administrators, the future looked very bright for the AARC. In a comment to a DTH reporter, David Liu expressed that, quote, "Down the road, I believe this center has a lot of potential. We are now just building the foundation." And so that brings us today, in 2021. And although the AARC never actualized, so much progress has happened in the past 25 years. The Asian American student population has now grown to near 20% of the entire student body now, and there are over 20 plus Asian student interest organizations on campus. On Thursday, the Asian American Center celebrated its grand physical opening, truly an occasion to celebrate. And in closing, I want to leave everybody with a quote that is actually the epigraph to my research paper. Remember that consciousness is power. Consciousness is education and knowledge. Consciousness is becoming aware because tomorrow's world is yours to build. And that quote is from Yuri Kochiyama, a very famous Asian American activist. And so as a recent graduate of Carolina, I'm very excited to see what the next generation of Asian American student leaders are going to bring to campus in the future. Thank you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce my good friend, Abhishek Shankar, who graduated last May with me as well at UNC. He served as the second Asian American Center campaign director and is currently a master's student in the Gilling School of Public Health. So I know he's got some wonderful introductions prepared, and I'll let Abhi take it away.
Hey folks, thank you for the very kind introduction, Sean. My name is Abhishek Shankar, and it's my honor to introduce all our esteemed guests today. I want to start off by welcoming Dr. Naitik Panwala, who was class of 1986 and was the founder and heart and soul of UNC Sangam. He was born in India and moved to Greensboro, North Carolina in 1977. And after Carolina, he graduated Duke at a Master's of Health Science and did his MD degree at the St. George's School of Medicine in Grenada. He currently serves as a hospitalist at UNC Rockingham in Eden, North Carolina, and does inpatient care. Next off, I'd like to introduce Eugene Lao, class of 1991, who's the co-founder and first president of the UNC Asian Students Association and has been a driving force in the creation of the Asian American Center. He was born and raised in Greenville, North Carolina, and at UNC, he served on Honor Court, received the Chancellor's International Leadership Award, and is a member of the Order of the Grail Valkyries. He went to Duke Law School and has been a senior leader at legal teams in many high-profile technology companies, such as Yahoo and Reltio, and he also lived and worked in Asia for 6 years. He's currently Chief Legal Officer at Prime Trust and partner at Red Dog Capital. He's the recipient of many prestigious university awards, including the University Diversity Award, recognizing his instrumentality in the creation of the Asian American Center. I next want to welcome Dr. Billy Fan, who was class of 1995 and MD class of 1999. He was the founder of the Asian American newspaper East Wind. At UNC, he majored in biology and was the president of the Asian Students Association. His work was recognized with the Order of the Golden Fleece. He married UNC alum Gloria, and they live in Raleigh with their 2 sons, and he's currently a partner at North Carolina Nephrology. In his spare time, he mentors high school students in a Raleigh refugee community. Ngoc Nguyen, class of 1994, was a founding member and one of the earliest presidents of the Vietnamese Student Association, as well as a public policy analysis major at Carolina. She grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, at the heart of a vibrant ethnic community, as her father founded the Greensboro Vietnamese Temple. She continues to be active in the Raleigh area Vietnamese community associations. Dr. Gang Yue joined the faculty of the curriculum in East Asian Studies in 1993 and served as the first chair when the curriculum was expanded to become the Department of Asian Studies in 2004. At the request of the then Asian Students Association, he developed and taught a course called Asia 82, Asian American Literature, in 1995, and later added another new course, Asia 89, Asian American Experiences, in 1998. Before 2004, Dr. Yue was involved in Asian American students' organizations in various formal and informal capacities, including a one-time faculty advisor for ASA and CUSA. After 2004, as department chair, he was instrumental in launching Vietnamese and Korean language programs in response to the requests for respective student organizations. And finally, Jun Young, who's one of my peers, graduated from UNC in 2020, majoring in global studies and public policy. During her time at Carolina, she was actively involved with the Asian American Students Association. She served as the cultural chair and led the annual showcase Journey into Asia, creating the 2019 theme Disorient, inspired by Edward Said's Orientalism. She later became president of ASA, while also working as a founding member of the Asian American Center campaign team. June is now currently a Master of Public Policy candidate at the University of Chicago, studying economic policy. Upon graduation in 2022, she will join the public finance investment banking team at UBS in New York City. We're so proud of her. Thank you, and I'm so excited to hear from our panelists today.
All right, thanks for the introductions, Abhi. I'm so honored to be here with our esteemed guests who are so critical in fostering this Asian American community here at UNC. I will begin with a few basic questions, but hope that we can have a discussion-oriented dialogue, and we will conclude with a brief Q&A from the audience. So I will kick us off with our first question for everyone to answer, and we can just make our way down the table. Where did you grow up? What was your experience like with your ethnic community? What was your experience like with Asian American community engagement?
Should I think I'll keep the mask on, and if you can't hear me, I'll try to repeat myself. So my name is Naitik Panwala. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina for the most part. When I went to high school, I was the only Indian person at my high school. And I felt out of place. I just felt like I couldn't see myself in any of my friends. Even though I had friends, it just felt like I was either invisible or it was just difficult to do things. I was also a vegetarian, so my dietary needs were different than anybody else's. And so when I would go to the cafeteria, there was always some kind of non-vegetarian food, so it was very difficult to eat. So those are the kind of things that we had in school. When I came to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, it was some of the same old things. I would come to Chapel Hill, I would see a fellow Indian, but we would never be able to interact with each other, and our numbers were far and few between. So I just felt, again, as somebody had mentioned earlier, you kind of felt invisible in a sea of a tremendous amount of people. Even though I felt welcome to this community, I just felt out of place. So that's kind of where my beginning was when I came to Chapel Hill.
Hi, I'm Eugene. Sean already told you guys about me. I didn't know there was only 250 Asians in Pitt County, but like in my high school class, there was one Chinese guy, 2 Indians, and 3 Koreans out of a class of a little over 400. So, you know, there weren't that many people growing up in Greenville that look like me or act like me. There probably aren't that many people that act like me anyway. But anyway, when I came to Carolina, it really was, there was a lot more Asian Americans than I was used to seeing. But at the same time, we were still a very small percentage of the population. You know, I think Sean mentioned that Asian Americans are close to 20% of the student body. Back then it was slightly over 2%, 2.3%. And that was across both undergrad and graduate schools. So it was a very small population. And you know, when I came here and we were trying to get an organization together, we were just you know, I think Sean seemed to have characterized my cohort as just the party guys, so maybe not the politically aware ones, but we were looking for a sense of community, and we were looking, you know, to be, you know, we were looking to be seen, right? We were, you know, not, you know, we didn't want to be stared at, you know, we were looking to be you know, heard and not just acknowledged. And so we were seeking a sense of community, given certainly coming from my background. So that's the answer to my first question. Billy?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Billy Fan. So I grew up in a town called Clayton, which is east of Raleigh. And right now it's sort of a thriving suburb of Raleigh, but back then, just like was voiced before, it was smaller, but probably much smaller than Greenville and Greensboro. So my parents immigrated from Taiwan, and so my dad was a town doctor, and the only other Asian kid in the whole county was my little sister. So it was very difficult to get in trouble between being the doctor's kid and being the only other Asian kid in the county besides my sister. So, like similar, references to being Asian in the South, especially in a small town, you kind of go through a lot of the same common themes, right? Like walking through the primary school and kids speaking Chinese or Vietnamese, or, sort of the dreaded lunchroom, scenario where you really want to eat that pork bun that your mom gave you, but you're going to pay the social price. And so sometimes you just opt for the bologna and cheese sandwich because it wasn't worth the social capital to risk during that time. So it's always trying about fitting in. I think, in a small town, a lot of times you fit in by playing sports. So I think that was one way I kind of try to fit in. Little did I know, or my parents knew at the time, that when you play like Pee Wee football, it's more of that's like the breeding ground for the varsity team for high school. And so that was kind of a very bad mistake, being the Asian kid on a Pee Wee football team in a small town. But that was just kind of what's growing up. And then later on, my parents kind of had this FOMO when it came to academics. And so they brought me from Johnson County schools to Raleigh School at Enloe, where there was a lot of Asians. And I was really excited about that. I kind of felt like the Asians in the Raleigh area at that time, in the late 80s, early 90s, kind of took it for granted about the Asian community they did have there. And so I actually kind of started the equivalent of the Asian American Student Association in Enloe because I was so excited, and I felt like these guys took it for granted. So I kind of got the bug early. But that kind of transitioned me later on to UNC, from the small town being Asian to a larger town, and then to UNC.
Okay. Good afternoon. My family left Vietnam before the fall of Saigon as the first wave of refugees to leave Vietnam. When we settled in Greensboro, there were very few Vietnamese or any Asians for that matter. But by the time I got to high school, Greensboro was very diverse as more and more waves of refugees came from Vietnam and other Southeast Asian countries.
No, I have a separate set of questions for myself. So.
Okay.
Yes, Professor Yue. When did you come to Carolina, and what?
I have all 6 questions to answer at the same time, or do you want me to do it? Because they assigned me 6 questions specifically. Collectively, all the others have 6. I myself have 6 questions. Well, it's nice to on the receiving end of assignment. So should I should I just go ahead with my all 6 questions? Not talking about all the other questions, right?
Oh, you can if you want to.
Or maybe I need to wait until they finish there, or they're wrong. Which way?
I can ask you a question now if you want to answer it. That you think that would be good?
So, okay, the first question to me, I have 6 questions. Number 1, when did you come to Carolina? Where were your first impressions of the dynamic here? We arrived in August 1993, here to start the fall semester. And my first impression was that, quote David Liu, David Liu, the third ASA president in history, that we are not even in the equation. Well, of course, we are wrong, but it's just totally invisible, okay? So, why David got that remark? Because I told him some stories. When he first, then Bailey also joined later, right, in trying to, developing an Asian American study course. I told David, okay, no, the first week I went to the local DMC to have my driver license changed. And the officer, okay, the DMA officer, once we finished all the paperwork, started joking about the Yankees, okay? And he said, well, there are Yankees who come to visit and leave. And then there are, the damned Yankees who come and stay. Oh, the damned Yankees in front of me, right? But he's not hostile at all. He's actually joking. So the next day, I got confirmation from one of my colleagues that is my interpretation. Well, we are completely outsiders, so we are harmless. Okay, this first impression. So, you know why we are, David mentioned that we are not in equation. Okay, I will hand it back to you, so I will continue.
I got a comment on that, because I have a DMV question too. So if you want to think about invisibility, when I went to get my driver's license in 1984, 85, something like that, I failed the first time, and but I got it the second time, and so I'm there, I'm getting my picture taken, they're filling out the card, and they were like, "What race are you?" And I said, "I'm Asian," and they were like, "Yeah, we don't have that," and I'm like, "Oh, that's okay, I get it." And back in the day, they didn't have that, so there's a lot of time you just put other. We don't have that either. They're like, "Are you white or are you black?" And I'm like, I'm not white and I'm not black. I'm Asian. They're like, "But we only have white and black." And I'm like, and he stared at me for a while, and he's got that Smokey the Bear hat, and he stared at me, and he put his hand on his chin, and he sort of thought about it. He goes, "Why don't we just leave it blank?" And I'm like, "Okay." And so of all the North Carolina driver's licenses I've ever had, race is always blank.
Thank you, Eugene. Actually, Professor Yue, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, and then we can come back around the table this way.
Oh.
What led you to teaching Asian American literature for the first time, even though it wasn't your field of specialization?
Well, let me first say what I'm going to say will disappoint those of you who are more politically active. There's no hunger strike. Okay, there's no sit-in. Okay, it's a very smooth process. Wow, yeah, David, and then, David, just the lobby, right? Say, "Oh, I'd like to," yeah, why not? So I write out a proposal and the draft syllabus, altogether like 3 pages, and handed to our chair, Dr. Judith Farquhar, who is an anthropologist of Chinese medicine. Some of you probably, Eugene, you mentioned her, right? So Dr. Judith Farquhar, who was the chair of a very small curriculum in East Asian Studies, quickly approved it, and then that's it. Of course, she supported me also because she knew I'd done my homework. Yeah, I actually wrote 2 chapters in my doctoral dissertation on Chinese American authors, and some of the heated debates, especially early, dating back to the 1960s, 70s, 80s. Of course, Dr. Farquhar also supported me to invite a prominent scholar in Asian American Literary Studies, Professor Solin Cynthia Wang, of UC Berkeley, to give a key as a speaker at Duke UNC joint curriculum. So that was the main, academic activity that we started. Very simple process. That speaks a lot about, I think, UNC. As an insider, and I think we had this wonderful laid-back, campus culture, even among the faculty. And of course, today is totally different. Let me say this. I have witnessed this, very sadly, what's going on wrong on campus among the, the political powers on there. But at that time, it's a very easy thing to do. So no hunger strike, no sitting. Just a very smooth sail.
Thank you, Professor Yue. Ngoc, I'm going to ask you, how did you originally get involved in the Asian Interest Student Organization, and who supported you? What were some of your challenges?
My friend Young Nguyen was a pharmacy student in '93, I believe, and she had the idea to create VSA and asked me to be vice president. I think initially we were worried about creating resentment by splintering from ASA, but the VSA members continue to remain ASA members, and the two groups often collaborated on projects and events. And I think it was mostly social functions. We did do some cultural events, but we both recognized the importance of appreciating our heritage and maintaining traditions.
If we wanted to make our way down to Billy, if you wanted to add.
Yeah, sure. So, sort of like what Eugene said, since he's sort of the OG here, he established a great organization for that brought in a sense of community. And I think, I was very influenced a lot by a class I took in high school, actually. It was an African-American lit class, and we talked a lot about race and civil rights and things of that nature. So I feel like coming into Carolina, I already kind of had this political/activist bent, probably more so than the typical Asian American that came from a small town in North Carolina. And so, at that time, it was a great time to be at UNC. It was very dynamic. The African American students were fighting for a Black Cultural Center, which this is the first time I stepped into the room, to this building today. And before that, it was just a little glass room in the student union. So it was just this tremendous vibrancy that was going on. I remember Spike Lee came to lead a rally. It was just a big national press. And so, it was just a great time to just sort of live that during that time. And also, the African American students were very vibrant. My freshman year, I had an African American a roommate through potluck. So as a result, I naturally had some African American friends, and I had some from high school too. And so I'd always listen to sort of their dreams and aspirations about, again, the Stone Center that we live in now, that we're here now. So, I think when I came in, I kind of had that bent. So by the time I was ended my freshman year, I call it swagger, some will call it arrogance. I ran for office for Asian Student Association, and with the intent of sort of, let's just make it more activist, make it a little more political, and have something lasting, on the shoulders of guys like Eugene and those guys who really had that social structure in place.
What was the response like from, your Asian American peers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we were 5% at that time, but I felt like everyone had just a great growth mindset. They were willing to learn about, they're willing to listen about it to it, and I think when I kind of look back, it's not really about the things that we did or we accomplished. It was more like friendships. That's really how I think about it back then. It was really at the right place at the right time. So we had, for example, I had this dream to have a newspaper, and I remember, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Chuck Stone, who was a very prominent professor at that time in the J School. He was a great civil rights activist, and I just called him, and I just said, I cold called him and said, hey, I need your help. And I sat in his office, and I just saw pictures of him and MLK and Malcolm X, and I was just mesmerized by this living legend here. And I just said, my grammar stinks, my writing's even worse, but I want to start this Asian American newspaper. And he said, I'll be your advisor, and here's some money. And after that, there's a woman named Vicki Chang, at that time was the only Asian journalism major. So I said, you're going to be the editor. And we had people who had a lot of bent towards cultural stuff, and so then we started sort of the journey into Asia, because they really wanted to do that. And then we had guys who had more bent, again, to social stuff. And I realized more now than I did back then that the social stuff like dances that maybe I kind of poo-pooed on a little back then, it was very important for community. Mm-hmm. So I felt like everyone kind of found their niche, and they kind of went for it. And it was just a matter of getting people together, just to bring that energy and do what they want to do.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good segue into a question for Eugene. How did you bring people together? How did you get the idea to co-found ASA?
I think it's been talked about, right? I think like we were seeking, a group of my friends and I, we were seeking a better sense of community. There were, as was pointed out, a few other Asian interest organizations on campus. I think we sought something that was maybe a little bit more broadly inclusive than what we had been seeing on campus, and as Billy said, it was just about relationships. The first set of folks was just like, we were just like, oh, there was probably less than 10 of us, right? And we were just all friends, and everybody's like, oh, who's going to be president? And everybody, all the Asians looked at the ground, and then I was like, well, who's going to be president, right? And so then it was me, and then that happened like 3 years in a row, because nobody would do it. But it was, I would love to tell you, as Dr. Yue said, I'd love to tell you that I had some grand vision or that I just, had imagined all this happening, and that's not true at all, right? It was, my goals in the beginning were simple, right? I want to be together in a place where I feel comfortable being myself, and I don't have to explain to anybody why I take my shoes off when I come into my dorm room, right? You know what I mean? I just I don't know why you wouldn't do that, right? So it's, it was really about building, leveraging off the relationships that we had and starting to build a community, and just, again, trying to have a community there where, like I said, it was like, look, if there's 3 Asians on campus and they're talking together, we're not plotting something, right? We're just chit-chatting, right? It's not, you don't have to stare, right? It's all cool, right? And it really just started very simply, I would say, from that.
Mm-hmm. What about with Sangam?
So I started Sangam back in '82. And my first semester I was here, 2 other fellow high school friends also came to Carolina. But to my surprise, they both left school the first semester. The first half of the year. So when my second part of that year came along, I was actually by myself alone. And again, I would see fellow Indians and I would like to meet up with them, but we never got a chance to. So as Eugene was saying, I really wanted to have friends and fellowship. That was my idea. But back then, there was no Google, there was hardly any computers, no Twitter or anything like that. So to find out who those people were, you actually had to go talk to them, and there was not enough time, because you would randomly see them when you're going from one class to another or one building to another, so you'd see them in the pit. The way Sangam was started is I actually had to go through phone books. Anybody know what a phone book is? Had to go through a phone book, and I would try my best to figure out this name looked Indian, and then I would call them. And we cold-called, 2 of us, cold-called several people, and we ended up getting about 12 people to say yes, and our first meeting was at Pizza Hut back in 1982, because we didn't have access to classrooms and things like that at that time. And so we all felt like it was a good idea to have some kind of organization. And so 12 of us, started with this idea of let's get something going. And with the help of a friend of mine who is a graduate student, Anshu Gupta, we come up with the name of Sangam, which means togetherness. And so, again, as Eugene said, he didn't have any grand vision, I didn't have any grand vision, but it was fellowship that I was looking for, it was friendship that I was looking for, and as he said, taking off shoes and not bringing them into the room, that was a big deal for me. Vegetarianism was a big deal to me. And I always had to explain myself, no, I can't eat this, I won't eat this, but I need this. And I always had to explain myself on all of that every time I go with anybody else. And I just felt like, okay, if we have this fellowship, if we have this friendship, at least we can share that culture together. And so that was the idea of Sangam back in '82.
Mm-hmm. Is it the case that Sangam was Dr. Kim, is it the case that Sangam was the first Asian American interest group on campus? Yeah. So Naitik is the real OG, right?
Thank you.
With that being said, I know when I was in AASA, ASA, our first GBM of the year, we would have over 100 people squeezed into one small room and giving a presentation about these are all our events and come join us. We love to have this community, and this is a question open to anyone. I wonder what student participation looked like, especially in those first few years. And Professor Yue, what did you experience? What did you observe among your Asian American students?
In my class, right? I think the question for me is what was student engagement in that course like, right? So I will just answer this question. And I just dug up, the paperwork finally from my archives. And I capped it at 30 to make it manageable. And 27 students completed it. And some obviously, withdrew. And I can, reading the names, and it's basically 2/3 Asian, 1/3, the other, including some, black students who's, half African American, half like Japanese or Korean or Vietnamese. So that's the makeup of the class. And for my self-interest, that's a secret self-interest. I want to teach this course, also want to learn more about, my daughter is growing up in this country, right? I mean, what is she going to, expect, being Asian American in this country, right? So not just for academic reasons. So at the beginning, I opened the forum up, say, you can talk anything you want to. Now, just right in, the second class, it kind of deteriorated into, like an interest group discussion. Well, basically kind of I lost control in terms of academic substance, because many of them want to just air their grievances, right? And that sort of thing. I said, let's get serious. This is an academic course. And of course, the thing is that once I start doing that and talking about academic stuff, and also, in a way, I'm also, my upbringing of being a Marxist, a Maoist, I emphasize, this is, I keep emphasizing, the central issue of labor in, Asian immigration, from very beginning up to this point, labor. And so some of the middle-class students, didn't really have a taste of that. Some, of course, very, very interested in. But in the end of the day, I realized, I'm the Fabi, patriarch, to the more rebellious of the students. I'm not Asian American. I never realized, I become Asian when I get here. You never consider yourself being Asian in Asia, right? You're Indian, you're Vietnamese. You're Chinese, you're Japanese. You never think you're Asian. So Asian American is really the American thing. So I keep emphasizing that. Also, that hurt some students. Say, look, I said this is an academic issue. The very idea of Asia is the Western, the construct of Western colonialism and imperialism in Asia. Why should we just use that? Of course, we recognize, we have to use it more strategically. But, when I push for those labor issues, class issue, and, imperialism, those kind of things, and some of the students run away from communism. America is the savior. What I'm going to talk about, imperialism. In Asia. So this is such I think, inherent tension between the first generation immigrant and, the children, the real Asian Americans who were brought up here, right? In addition, of course, I pushed very hard on labor, on class, on imperialism, colonialism. This is, I'm sorry. So some students, I realized, they dropped it. So I had started with more than 30, some on the wait list, and come to my class, and then I finished with 27. So this I found out just last week, digging up, my paperwork. So, of course, it's liberating in the moments, but also, in hindsight, when I reflect on this experience, okay, there is this generation gap, okay, between the teacher being the immigrant, okay, who don't. Well, I'm very sympathetic, but I want to. Keep it within the realm of academic studies. I don't want to use as a forum as an activist activity. Anyway, yeah, that's my reflection on my class, the first class.
Thank you for the academic perspective. What about from the student organizations? What were those first years look like? What did those first years look like in terms of participation?
Well, again, okay, folks here, they know better. I wasn't really actively involved in their activities because, I said, okay, if you need my support, more support, or my advocacy in the dean's office, yes, let's do that. Just tell me, okay, but I'm not involved at all. Okay, they run their own business. But as a kind of an observation, I didn't want to involve also because the organizations, again, I'm not trying to downplay the significance of them. It's kind of a ghetto activity. You are Indian, you are Vietnamese, you are Korean, and you are Chinese. They're all separate organizations. is great. So that's why I signed up as I think I was a one-time advisor for ASA. But there are all other groups. They are all legitimate, of course, but how do you get organized to get it? You have, ASA had night into Asia, right? It's a journey into Asia event every year. That was very, very good. But then the ethnic groups each had their own events, right? And I said, well, yeah, why don't you just have fun? But you don't need me to support you, right? Of course, I was very, as a department chair, actually, I, launched the Korean program, just the Korean student KUSA. Of course, through Dr. Chiu, so say, can we get, the class, offer some Vietnamese classes, Korean classes. And the Korean class was, for the first 5 years, was self-funded. First, we, made some fundraising. A Korean American donor, really provided wonderful seed money to hire instructor, to teach, to start it. Then we built on that and get a 3-year grant, from the Korean Foundation. And that's how we got this Korean. And the Vietnamese, actually, Dr. Harry, some of you may have took his class. Dr. Harry actually, he's a China specialist, but he also, he was trained as a translator, Vietnamese translator during the war. He actually was sent to Vietnam. And so Dr. Harry said, well, if you want to teach this course, I will give you a course release and teach Vietnamese instead of Chinese or Chinese culture or history course. So that's how we got the Vietnamese course started. So behind the doors, what we could do in the Department of Asian Studies, that's what I do. But I'm really not directly involved.
Thank you so much. From our other panelists too, what was student engagement like in the early years? Anyone.
OG.
For us, communicating was very, very hard. When to have a meeting, where to have a meeting, who is free, what opportunities for the meeting time is there. So we didn't have cell phones. We would have to use our rotary phone back in our dorm, et cetera, et cetera. So it was difficult to get it all started, but we would make a decision at one meeting, when would the next meeting would be, et cetera, et cetera. Then we would try to communicate through the newsletters. But slowly, after the first year, the second year, the third year, it started picking up. We would have more and more engagement. Then we also reached out to graduate students. We felt like when they came from India to the US, there wasn't anybody to welcome them, and they were probably more homesick than those of us who have parents in America. So we try to engage them also and try to have graduate students as a part of our Sangam organization. The engagement was slow at first due to communication issues, but then people liked what we were doing. The community was supportive of us, and we had more and more support year after year. And I was happy to see some time back I was hearing that Sangam was the largest Indian organization in general on the UNC campus, and I was just very surprised. And again, that wasn't the reason why the organization was started, but it was good to see that that's how well received it was after a while. And that was the hard work of everybody else who came after us.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I mean, we didn't have computers or cell phones. We would call each other, right? On the rotary phone, if you had one in your dorm room. But we started off with just with a group of friends, right? So it was just relationships, and then I know this other guy, and so we probably, and the numbers-wise, I bet we started off with, I don't know, might have been 15, something like that. That would be about your normal meeting size. If it was 25, it'd be a lot of people. I could tell you that, like, back then, Billy can comment about what he thought, but like, I would not have believed you if you had told me that ASA would be more than 100 students. I could not have possibly imagined that. And it was, but again, as Sean said, if you like to party, it's easy to engage people, right? So, we had a lot of social events, and we just kept getting more and more people. And then folks like, Billy, Ngoc, joined up. And so, yeah, that was, the start of it was just through the relationships, word of mouth, spreading the word.
Right. Yeah, we didn't have any issues with the VSA numbers because by the time I came to campus in '90, ASA was already well established and had a large pool of Asian students, and we just kind of drew from the Vietnamese students as a subset of ASA members to create VSA, and the numbers subsequently increased with each incoming class.
I'm not quite as old as these guys, the stories that they were telling, like doing smoke signals, telling friends that we have a meeting.
You had a pager, I bet.
Yeah, we did have some flip phones if you were a cool kid. But I'd say, by the time we came around, it's almost like the 80-20 rule, right? So it's sort of like 20% organization was sort of like-minded, like what I kind of wanted to do, to be more of an activist organization. The other 80% just want to continue on with the social stuff and the dances, which was, again, looking back, I realized how important that is. I didn't realize at that time that provided the community. But the 20%, I would say the 80% was very open-minded to what we had to say. They wouldn't like walk out of the room when I start talking about like the glass ceiling or something like that. Some roles, some eyes might roll and glaze over, but I think people were genuinely wanting to learn more about what a group of friends wanted to say about some of these issues and why we need to be more active. But the 20% really brought a lot of energy. Jeff Wong here with the Asian American Resource Center. We had some names that some people might know, is like David Liu's mentioned, he was sort of on the conservative end of the political spectrum, and then there was a Hubie Yang who was on the left side of the political spectrum. These were just like intellectual giants, right? Like one went later on to Harvard, went to Columbia Law, and we just had these great conversations. And the discourse was very nice. It was very pleasant. It wasn't just sound bites or just like angry rhetoric. It was like, okay, I love it that we have all these different viewpoints. We have all this different energy. And let's just talk about it. And we would have general body meetings just to do stuff like that. And so I think, the 80% would show up for that, and they were educated about it. And I think that was I think it was just the right place at the right time. And, knowing campus leadership, I knew that, there's a good chance that once I graduate, once David, Jeff graduates, that the focus could change. And that's fine. That's just part of the campus leadership. That's how it works. It's very fluid. So we kind of knew that we had this sort of energy and that we need to capitalize on it. And I just felt like everybody else was on for the ride and were very engaged at the same time.
Mm-hmm. It's always interesting to learn about how student activism engagement has changed over the years. Professor Yue, what has been the biggest change you've witnessed and participated in around Asian American life at UNC?
Of course, the biggest change is the demographic, right? Everyone can tell. So, well, we are approaching 20%, right?
Yes.
For the incoming freshmen. This is amazing. Yeah, that's of course, the biggest change. I hope that it will continue. I think we probably will run into some kind of invisible ceiling down the road that may have to find a way to cap it. I don't know. The big change, of course, is also reflected in our department. Okay, I started as number 5th member. Plus, there are half dozen other affiliated faculty members, like from history, religious studies, anthropology, political science. Those, department that those faculty members who specialize in some aspect of Asia. Okay, so these are so together what we put all together. There are fewer than 10. Okay, to start with. Today, our own department has a FTE, full-time equivalent. Okay, our FTE is about 40. So I started as the number 5, right? And today we have 40. Of course, we added more programs. We eventually expanded into the Middle East. So our name has recently changed to Department of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. Okay, we started with East Asia, then we added South Asia. Then later we added the Middle East. So that's a big change. And another thing, of course, that I think this is actually probably not directly related to this question, but I really thought about the failures or the success, what I experienced here. Okay, as I said, Carolina is very supportive. Well, of course, I got here at the right time. Okay, the globalization accelerated in the 1990s, and the rise of China and Asia, right? So those things all come together. So of course, I spent so much time eventually doing international exchanges, study abroad, that really totally took me away from the campus Asian American activities. But the biggest failure, I think, again, come to the class issue. I actually worked with UNC admission. Okay, I think Steve Farmer was then the director. I pushed very hard to include at least the working class of Asian Americans into their admission consideration when it comes to affirmative action. Okay, especially I emphasize the Hmongs. Okay, because I had some Hmong students, coming to me and telling me this all very traumatic experiences, right? Okay, North Carolina, for your information, has the largest Hmong population. Of course, this time, Sonny Lee won Olympic gymnastics all around, right? But yeah, Hmong, okay? So I pushed very hard, and actually, I think equal opportunity and admission all kind of sympathetic with me. But in the end, they say no. NC law, okay, does not apply to any other groups but African Americans and the Native Americans. I said these people need strong support in recruiting. Actively, we should reach out to recruit them and support them with especially financial support. For these very, very low income, students. This is, I think, I really fought hard. But of course, the other success, as I mentioned, we took off. Just in less than 30 years, we could become such a full-fledged department, and we have a dozen international exchange programs today. of course, the pandemic really is hard on that, but still, this is what I see the biggest change. So in other words, Asian American studies or Asian American student organization or activities, activism, all the things really hinge on two pillars. One, of course, demographic. This is the biggest change. You need to have the population, right, to support it. Number two, of course, you need to have Asian studies. Okay, remember, don't think Asian study has little to do with, unless you want to study language, culture of Asia, right? Asian study is the pillar, okay? And indeed, a lot of other minor programs are all supported by our alumni. Okay, through fundraising, like I mentioned, the Korean program, we got the first 2-year seed money, to launch it from a Korean American, alum. So anyway, now I use the forum. Now, I always tell my students later, don't forget if you get very successful, make some donation to the Department of Asian Studies. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have one last question for the other panelists before we move to the Q&A session with our audience, and that is, how do you feel that your student organization experience has influenced your engagement later in life today?
Start at the other end.
Oh, it's had a large impact. I guess I've always been civil-minded, and I continue, for the past 6 years, served on the executive board of the Vietnamese American Association in Raleigh, where again, we try to encourage the younger generations to appreciate their heritage. We do several large annual events, cultural events for that purpose, and try to maintain, like I said, the cultural traditions and the language. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think mine's probably a little bit more philosophical. So I remember this one incident when I kind of believed a lot of my own rhetoric when I was an undergrad about all this stuff about racism, activism, and racial stuff. And I felt like at one point, I probably wasn't at a good mindset where it kind of bothered me a little bit too much. And there was a sermon I read from MLK that was from the book of Matthew, and he talks about, during that time, because it was just a great time for me to read this, where he kind of discussed about being, he took the verse to be as shrewd as a serpent, but as gentle as a dove. And I think what he was talking to the African American church at that time, saying, we need to really still be aware of our surroundings. We need to know the laws. We need to know how to navigate this world. But in order to be like gentle as a dove, we still need to be kind and compassion, and to really meld that together. And I mean, for a guy to say that to the African American church, who the dogs were attacking, Jim Crow laws, it really spoke to me that how it's really important to, yes, be aware of your surroundings, be knowledgeable, educate yourself, don't be in the echo chamber, hear from other people's views, but at the same time, how far kindness can go in this world. And so I just felt like that was sort of like the main lesson that I reflect back then, how those lessons kind of taught me how those two really need to go hand in hand.
Hell, Billy, how am I going to follow that? I'm just the party guy. As Sean mentioned, after I graduated from law school, I moved to Asia for 16 years, and I came back to the States in 2011. And at that time, I was coming back to UNC for a meeting of some sort, and so I was like, and then something popped up, and I was like, shit, ASA is still here. I can't even believe it. So I reached out to some student leaders, and since that time, there's been 10 years now, right? I would just try to get to know each sort of generation of leaders, and I would say they continue to, honestly, inspire me and inspire the passion I have for the university. And as Dr. Yue said, it's it has really inspired me to try to give back and pay it forward. Look, we were trying to build a sense of community then, and then we're still trying to do the same thing now. Have we made as much progress as I would have liked? Candidly, no, right? But we're taking steps in the right direction. The opening of the Asian American Center is just huge and such a dream. It's like a movie. And so, it is, it continues to inspire me. I would also encourage all of you to give back in the ways that you can. I think what's going on here is tremendous, and I look forward to great things in the future, and I hope to be able to be, consistently engaged.
So the organization helped me by just becoming more of a leader and trying to leave something for others as you live this world, and try to engage in your community, try to keep the culture that your blood is made in, and keep sharing your culture with others, because our culture is just as important as other people's culture, and it's important to share that with everybody else. And then we become one. We're not individuals anymore. We become one big community. But each person's culture is very, very important. And when that is blended together, it becomes more special.
Thank you so much, panelists, for taking the time to be here and sharing your reflections with us. Now we're going to take a few Q&A from the audience. So if you have any questions, if you could just come up to this microphone stand right here and ask. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'm going to go ahead and break the ice because I know nobody ever wants to get up and ask the first question. So thank you all. It's so important to fill in this history. I learned several things from what you all said, and it's really fascinating to hear about those early years. So I'm wondering, for our alumni, looking back, especially because you were all involved in organizing and founding different groups, if you could tell us a little about your interactions with other students of color or other student groups. I know that some of you overlapped with the Push for the Stone Center, where we are, and of course there was a lot of other student activism at that time. So, perhaps it ranged from quite a bit to zero, but I would be very curious to hear about that.
Well, for me, I kind of alluded to this before. I felt sort of a kinship with the African American, the BSM, back in the day. It was just, again, the time that we were there, it was just very, I'm saying this in a good way, politically charged, especially when they were trying to fight for the Black Cultural Center. I feel like I was very fortunate, and I probably took it for granted that having a good set of African American friends at that time who were sort of like-minded, so I could feed off the energy and kind of hear the struggles that they went through. I don't think I necessarily had any official channels with the BSM, but it was more like some of the leaders there, we would just kind of talk as friends. And so I think that was nice. Ngoc alluded to the Vietnamese Student Association started when I was on campus as well. And what they did, it kind of also made me realize, again, that we're not a monolith in terms of Asian Americans, that they needed their space, Sangam had theirs, CASA had theirs, and it wasn't a rivalry. And I think, she may not remember, but I remember her telling me that when I was president. But yet, I kind of felt like the voice of Asian Americans kind of came from our organization with, I think VSA was very aligned. Like she said, they were very integrated with ASA at that time. And so, again, with all these little groups, you certainly don't want to see as being fractured. You kind of need one cohesive voice, but at the same time, we're not a monolith compared to what non-Asians might think we are. So I realize, again, now several years, I'm very humbled to know that, or realize that everybody kind of need to have their niche. They need to have their community. The Vietnamese students need to have their community. The Indians, the Koreans, and all that was important, and it all kind of works together as one. And fortunately, again, I felt like we were at the right place at the right time when we were all able to cooperate in that way.
Yeah, I would agree with Billy. I mean, when I was here, the struggle, at the time it was called the Black Cultural Center. The struggle for that was very, very real, right? And it was very politically a charged thing on campus. I have also talked to, I had suite mates, African American suite mates, and it was kind of a very powerful time. When we started ASA, we reached out to leaders in BSM. We reached out to leaders in Sangam just to try to figure out how other folks, had gone before and sort of, trailblaze there. And so we definitely had outreach, but at the same time, I think, our, at least certainly my personal sense was that, like, I actually, especially when it came to BSM, like, I didn't want to, like, I thought what they were doing was really, really important, and we were very, very small. Like, I didn't want to sort of like take away from that thing. I was just like, look, I just want this, I just want the group to party with, so I wasn't, we weren't, to Billy's point, we weren't probably as, not probably, we were not as politically dynamic then, and part of that was probably unintentional, and part of it was a little bit intentional.
I was inspired by the Black student movement. They were very small. They had a very small office in the student union.
Yeah.
And they were working very, very hard to get an identity. And there was resistance. They felt like they had their place and they should just stick with that. But no, that wasn't enough, and that was rightfully so. And so they fought and fought to get more of an identity, more of their own space, I guess more of whatever they were getting, and rightfully so. And so when I saw that fight, I said, okay, the Indian students also will benefit from having this kind of heart and soul, and we should ask for things. And one of the things that I asked for, but I never got it, was Hindi language. I'm envious, I'm very, very envious. Professor, you had a Vietnamese language being taught. I think you said you asked somebody to do that. Mm-hmm. So I went to administration and I asked them, I'd like to have Hindi language for UNC Chapel Hill. And they said, no, you will have to come up with your own money.
Yes.
And then you have to find your own professor and do it. And I thought it would be more simple than that. There were Indians on the campus, and I think that we lose our language if we don't get taught, and we weren't officially taught at home. And we were raised in an environment where we spoke mostly English at home. And so we said, okay, if I can have a Hindi language taught, that would be wonderful. But they said you have to have your own money, you have to have your own professor, and then once you get that established, then we will see what we can do with it. And just felt like a punch in the gut.
But Eugene, didn't you feel that we were always riding on the coattails of BSM though? Because I always envied BSM because they were always able to build such a great solidarity among
Exactly.
African American
Oh,
students.
for sure.
Right, and there was no issue around which the Asian American students couldn't rally, at the time anyway. Not when I was there.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, back when I was on campus, you will remember, like, there was a fight against apartheid. There were
Right.
students,
There was a
right?
housekeeper's wages issue, remember
there were
that?
tents,
Yeah.
on the quad, right,
Yes.
with people, protesting about university investments in South Africa, right? I mean, there was,
Yeah.
it was as Billy said, it was a politically charged, very, very dynamic time. I mean, many times uncomfortably so, but rightly so.
But I think at the same time, part of it's cultural because, almost all of our parents were immigrants, right? And so they're just trying to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And
not rock the boat.
yeah, you don't rock the boat. You just put your head down and you work, and it's kind of not in our ethos as an immigrant kid. I remember, my parents were very involved with Taiwanese politics at that time, and so I kind of saw what they did, and I remember my grandparents would be like, don't do what your parents are doing, you get blacklisted and all this stuff. And so you kind of always had these pressures not to do anything. And granted, I don't think there was, to your point, a big event for us to rally around, but I think it was important for us, and I think that's kind of what my generation kind of, wanted to do, is have that infrastructure there if needed, and also to be an education source for other Asian Americans. But I think a lot of us had to cross that cultural barrier of, just be a good American and just follow the rules and do what you need to do. Or the parental pressures like, don't rock the boat, just get your education and get out.
Yeah, as an Asian kid growing up in a small southern town, you're really not in the habit of calling attention to yourself. So, yeah.
So I'll ask the next question because I didn't look to see if anybody else was moving, but I'm going to ask the next.
There were no
question.
hands raised. So
Thank you so much for coming back. It's wild I'm also an alum, so it's wild to see sort of the previous generation coming back and having all these stories and kind of thinking back to where this legacy goes. And this is kind of in line with Sean's question or Sean's introduction about sort of not being politicized and thinking about community. And there seems to be sort of this vague gray line, right, between politicizing yourself and then creating community, thinking about culture, educating people. This is sort of forward-looking, because I know Dr. Kim just asked a question to think about the past. As y'all have gone out into the world, and as you're coming back to rebuild this community, to help contribute to it, what is your philosophical approach to thinking about moving forward? How do we balance this line between politics, right? Because we keep going through these cycles where multiculturalism is in vogue, and we go through and we support all the cultural organizations, and then we kind of come up in moments of tension. And I say this very pointedly because this year was one of those years where we had a moment of tension for the Asian American community specifically. So how do we find a balance between these two, right? What does it mean to be a radicalized Asian American versus kind of still wanting to put energy and effort into building our community through cultural competence and passing down a legacy?
Yeah.
That was really long. Feel free to just ignore that.
Yeah. It's a delicate balance, right? Because you don't want to alienate people, especially you're trying to increase your numbers and build that solidarity. So I don't know what the best approach would be.
It's a great philosophical question, right? I mean, and it extends beyond what we're talking about and doing here today, right? But at the end of the day, it's, for me, I would say, like, philosophically, I'm a pragmatist, right? You know, Susin knows, Sean knows, Dr. Nguyen, like, I'm about results and outcomes, right? And like, if I'm over, at least I believe, if I'm over-radicalized, I take away from the impact of what I'm doing, right? And yet at the same time, I need to use the foundation that I have to move forward, you know, as quickly, you know, and as expeditiously as I can, right? So it's actually all, for me, it's all about balancing, right? You have to have the foundation of the community and make your voice and make yourself be seen. At the same time, like, you want to still have that net positive impact, right?
Yeah, I mean, boy, I don't know if you can answer that question. But you know, I think, again,
it's a college question.
Well, it's sort of what I alluded to, what really impacted me in MLK's sermon, right? The verse in Matthew about having that balance of, you know, shrewd as a serpent and innocent as a dove. I think it's important to, again, know the issues, know what you believe and why you believe. And then for me, it's just to give people the benefit of doubt and compassion. Like, for example, there's certain things I used to get triggered about, right? And now I realize I shouldn't be that way. Like, for example, you know, like if one of my patients in Johnson County, or, you know, I go to a predominantly Caucasian church, they comment like, wow, your English is so good. Where are you from? I'm like, I was born in Chicago, you know, grew up in Clayton, and you kind of this weird look. And, you know.
Where are you really from?
Well, yeah, exactly. But, you know, right now, in my life, I'm okay with ignorance. I don't do good with maliciousness, you know. But if they're ignorant, I just let that slide. And I'm like, you know, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. People change. I've changed a lot. My thinking now is very different than it was when I was 18. And so I try to give people patience about it. I try to feel like, you know, I haven't arrived, certainly when I was 18, 29. And I try to do my best to hear both sides and to have the balance in that way. So, you know, I think it goes. Again, I think being kind and nice goes a long way into society, as easy as it sounds. I think part of that is just being patient. You know?
Yeah. I say keep doing what you're doing. Look where our organization has come from, where we were born to what it is today. So keep doing what you're doing. But when you see things that are missing, when you see things that are wrong, I think it's okay to push the envelope, but we do it with kindness, we do it with humility, we do it with love, and we want to be included. That's all we're asking for. We don't want to step on anybody's toes, but if Hindi language is still not being taught over here, you have to ask yourself why. And then you have to ask yourself, is it fair to have that taught here? And then you have to do what you can, because that's what you're educated for, to see that these things are missing, these things need to be included. I don't know. Is Hindi language an option now?
Oh, okay.
Finally. So good. But that's an example of what we can do. So that's just an example. So I think we have the ability to do that now. We have a voice. I think it's important to use that voice. Yeah, but with love and kindness.
Hi, I'm Sarah Hawley. I just graduated this past May, and before then I had the pleasure of serving on the Asian American Center campaign team. You know, first of all, thank y'all so much for being here today and answering everybody's questions. I mean, it's been, really educational and helpful to, hear from y'all. I'll preface my question by saying that, on one hand, I mean, look at how far we've come, right? The center that a lot of you have dreamed about, is now here and, continues to grow. On the other hand, I, see this trend of like a lot of the same problems that you all experienced and the challenges that you all faced, are repeating themselves and like continuing for the younger generation. Whether that's, trying to find a sense of belonging or, trying to figure out what's the best way to, stand in solidarity with other minorities. And that said, what advice would you all impart on this next generation of students as they, navigate a lot of the same challenges that you did?
I would say you guys, the students, having worked with the student campaign team, I mean, the students here are amazing. I mean, the level of maturity and self-awareness that students have now, certainly as the party guy, there was like, this is way beyond like, Billy was saying he's definitely evolved, since he was 18. I pretty much, my mind is exactly the same. So I still want to go out and have a drink on Franklin Street. So I really think that you guys should lean on your community, right? I mean, I don't even know that we could, sort of the struggle for self-identity, would you have been able to name that when you were a student? I mean, like, it has a name, right? You guys actually know the nature of the problem. I think we had, for me, I would say, I had an internal feeling that like something wasn't quite right. I could have never named it. I didn't know what the struggle was. I just like sometimes I'm not feeling that comfortable, right? And like, what is that? I don't know what that is. You guys have a, you guys have a name to the problem. I don't know what the solution to the problem is. We all, walk our own path and try to step through those things. But the community that's built here, and again, now the sort of permanent institutional resources that we're putting behind this, I think that's the first step, and then leaning on each other. That would be my.
So I got a practical advice for you. It's not going to be, again, earth-shattering or, philosophical, but I just feel like, your 4 years at college, particularly at Carolina, it's just a great time to talk to other people who are different in your faith, different in your ethnicity, different in your political persuasion. Because I tell you, when you get older, it's kind of weird if you ask someone, I don't really agree with your politics, can we talk? It's just hard. But, here you kind of have the common religion of UNC basketball, right? So you kind of have this commonality of being a college student, love for sports, 80% are from North Carolina. But it's just a great time to like find someone that you don't agree with, but you can kind of talk in a way that's humble. You're not there to convince them about anything. You're not there for them to convince you. You just genuinely want to learn. And I just think just to be curious, just to have that growth mindset, I just think it's so unique in the college campus to really tackle that now, to really, and maintain those relationships as you get older. I have a lot less minority friends now that I can have lunch and kind of, grasp these issues with than I did back in Carolina. And so I think, if I could, I guess, give some advice to college students now, is just to use this time to have dialogue, especially with people who are different from you, and just get away from the echo chamber that you're in right now.
Thank you.
My name is Maida. I'm a senior at UNC. I'm really interested in the intersection of regional and cultural identities, and I know Sean talked earlier about the black-white binary in the South, and for you guys growing up here, talked about the generational gap in terminology, like going from being like I'm Asian to Asian American, and then that in and of itself is so diverse and encompasses a lot of different countries and things like that. And so I'm just curious, for you, if you had answers about this, like, do you consider yourself, like when you're thinking about your identity, like a Southerner and what that means to you, and how that was when you were? Because I think like me and my peers now, I'm just Asian American peers at least, I think like people would proudly claim that I'm from the South, I'm a Southerner, versus I'm curious about what it was like going to UNC during that time period when you're trying to bridge different parts of yourself and trying to grapple with that. So I don't know if that makes sense, but just to you, like, what does Southern identity mean and how that played out in your life at UNC as a college student at that time period?
Actually, I've struggled with it a bit because I wanted to, I guess I was kind of black sheep among the Asians, right? I felt I was because I was hanging out with a lot of non-Asian friends initially until I joined ASA. So I think every kid still struggles with that balance between maintaining the cultural heritage and not becoming too Americanized. At some point, we kind of look down upon those kids who have lost their roots and have become too Americanized. So that was a struggle for me in the early years.
Yeah, an example that comes up that I can think of now is, so I guess to your point, like, when I was younger and I went to Taiwan, right, all my relatives are like, you're not Taiwanese, you can't speak,
Right.
you dress weird, you don't, and like my aunt wanted to just take me to TGI Fridays. I'm like, well, I don't want this, I want like real like Taiwanese stuff. So I'm not really Taiwanese, but then, I remember to be Southern Asian American, going to visit my cousins in Los Angeles, and they just made fun of me for being an Asian kid with a Southern accent. So like the struggle is real, And at one point that you mentioned, Dr. Yue, about, I remember coming to Carolina and meeting that Hmong community, that Laotian community from Kings Mountain. And it just blew my mind that, wow, there's this big Laotian Hmong community in Kings Mountain that, again, blew that model minority myth out the window, where these people were struggling, low SES, parents of blue-collar workers, and it made me realize, again, the diaspora and the diversity of Asians, whether it's East Asians or Indians in the Southeast, and the different struggles they went through. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I know that it is very distinctive. I think that's another reason why this is really exciting about this Asian American Center, particularly at UNC, because it's going to be a very different feel than if it's in the Northeast or Berkeley, right? And so I think it's just, I don't have an answer, but I think this is a good venue to explore those and to have discussions about it.
I agree with Billy. I think this is a great vehicle for that, and that's what it should be doing. I mean, I think for each person, it's probably their own individual journey. I mean, we can look around the room. Asian American, Taiwanese American, Indian American. You're a Southerner. You're a lawyer. You're a doctor, right? You're a Democrat. You're a Republican. I mean, there's all these parts constitute. That's the sort of the algorithm of who is you, and like, and which which one has more weight and which one has less weight. That's probably each one of us having to decide what's important to us. I mean, I grew up for my first 25 years of my life, I was living in North Carolina, and then in the last 27 years of my life, I haven't lived in North Carolina. So, do I have Southern roots? I do. Would I consider myself a Southerner today? I'm not so certain that I would, right? And so, like, it was kind of bigger at one point and a little bit less big now. Do I see myself as a Californian? I don't know about that either. So, I think it is a delicate balance. But, there's a term that Heidi used, the AAC opening the other day. She referred to the community as a tapestry. But each one of us as individuals is also a tapestry, right? There's all those different threads that like form the story of our lives. So I think for each person, it's going to be a little bit different.
So when I went to India, my fellow countrymen did not think I was Indian. When I'm in America, my fellow countrymen don't think I'm American. And so the graduate students affectionately called me ABCD. I don't know if you all have heard that term before. American, born, confused, Desi. Desi is another word for Indian, so ABCD blends in really well. So we were not in any one place or the other. And that's unfortunate. But we are a blend, and I think we need to celebrate that blend. And we take the best of all the worlds that we are coming from, and we put the best out. And we take this opportunity as college students and learn as much as you can. And then the tapestry, we need to blend that all together and be the individual that you're meant to be, because you have unique experience.
Thank you all so much. I think at this time, I'll invite everyone to thank the panel one last time, please. This was such a rich conversation, and I hope it's the first of many on this campus, and I hope that our Campus History Task Force can start to bring this history into some of the studies that they're doing now. I want to point out that we have a couple other alums of this generation in the audience. Didn't think you were going to sit there anonymously, did you? So Robin and Jeff, please give a little wave. We've got such a collection of ASA folks here. So we invite everyone to come out in the lobby for refreshment and further conversation. Thank you again for such a great conversation today.
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you, and thank you for attending. Glad you're here.